Innovation, resilience, agility. It's how Michigan businesses continue to work together to make a difference now and shape the future. Join us and make your mark where it matters. Visit michiganbusiness.org/radio.
They do have a timeout. Decide not to use it. Curry, way downtown. Bang! Bang! Oh, what a shot from Curry! With 0.6 of a second remaining. The brilliant shooting of Stephen Curry continues. And he ties the NBA record with his 12th three-pointer of the game.
Now back to 95.7 The Game.
Yes, the great Mike Breen on the call. Hard to believe. 5 years ago now, Stephen Curry in Oklahoma City. Final hour of Warriors This Week here with JD and Nick Friedel. It's an absolute pleasure to be joined by the man on the call tonight for the Warriors and the Celtics on ABC. Mike Breen joins us here on 95.7 The Game. Mike, thanks a lot for taking some time. And my goodness, 5 years ago? It seems like that was yesterday.
Did I have dark hair back then? No, I still had gray hair back then. Hello, John. Hello, Nick. It does seem like hard to believe that's already been 5 years. And now, that season, as you guys know, was, it's one of those magical runs, not just by a team, but by the way he played. And now the discussion, and rightfully so. And Nick, I saw what you wrote the other day. I mean, is he playing the best ball of his career now? I mean, the fact that we're even contemplating that just shows you what kind of level he's playing on now.
Yeah, and it is remarkable, and that's what I kind of wanted to get your take on as you prepare for this game tonight, because you look at the way the Warriors have played with him this season versus the way they've played without him. And, I mean, you've called a lot of these games and seen a lot of the great moments that he's had in his career. I mean, he's doing it in a different way because he's kind of had to. I mean, where are you on the whole, hey, the Warriors were so great that Steph was great, but he never really had to do it in the same way that he's doing it now. Now he's doing it, and he's helping to hold this team up.
Well, when you watch him play like this, John, and you see what he's capable, you think back to when Kevin Durant came to the Warriors and how a player of Stephen Curry's magnitude sacrificed his own individual game to bring in Kevin Durant. It's kind of like when Dwayne Wade did when LeBron James came. And there's over the course of time in the NBA where star players did that in order to make it work. But it just, to me, it hammers home the point of just how great he is and what he did for the sake of the team to win some championships by sacrificing his game. Because what he's doing now, he had it in him back then, but he didn't have to do it as much because he had Durant, he had Klay Thompson. And, when Klay comes back next year, he'll sacrifice some shots again because all he cares about is winning. But to watch him do it this way where, the defense is focused on him, he's the number 1, 2, and number 3 option. It's pretty special. And there is a case that could be made in some ways that he's playing the best ball of his career. Like every player that, mentally you get better. You see the game better. You read the game better. You've experienced every possible defense thrown at you. And now you look at him physically, he's probably stronger than he's ever been. And he's also probably pretty refreshed after sitting out a year. He didn't want to do that, but he did. And I think it's benefited him this year. So you bring all that into play. And it's as Steve Kerr said the other day, it's such a joy to watch.
Mr. Breen, it's always good to hear your voice. And in the context of that answer, I'd ask you this. Steph is not going to win the MVP award this year. He doesn't have the narrative behind him. And frankly, the Warriors haven't played well enough to give him that extra push. But could you make the argument that Steph Curry is the most valuable player to his own team in the league?
Absolutely could make the argument. But you could probably make it with a few other players as well. But I think it hammers home more with him, especially with Klay out and, the amount of young players and new players they have in their system. That's the other thing is some key guys are just getting acclimated to the way the Warriors play. And Nick, as you know, playing with Steph Curry, like whenever you play with a great player like a Steph Curry or LeBron James, it's different in terms of fitting into the system because they're so unique in their talent, the way they see the game, that it takes a while before you can really really get comfortable playing with them from a standpoint of and all that they do for their team and can make you better. And I think that's one of the things that he's doing better now too as well is his leadership and his guidance, and then occasionally getting on guys to show them that what happened that particular night's not acceptable. So it's just the whole package. Guys like that, John and Nick, we fall prey to it every single year. When guys play at this super high level, night after night, year after year, we really do start to take them for granted. And it's just, he had another great game. No, it's amazing what to do. And to do it every single night is, it's just people, even in the NBA who play in the NBA, don't realize sometimes just how difficult it is to do what these guys do every night at this level.
No, I think that's a great point. Mike Breen joining us here on 95.7 The Game, the Warriors and the Celtics tonight in Boston. This matchup in particular has provided some really good games on the ABC package over the last few years. A couple of years ago, the Warriors went into Boston shorthanded, and I think the year before that it was at Oracle when Kyrie and Steph Curry were going back and forth. Maybe a week or two ago, though, you'd be looking at this matchup and going, the Celtics aren't playing well. They're dealing with issues. Curry's out. But this one's come together nicely, hasn't it, with both of these teams suddenly playing better and Curry playing at the level that he's playing at?
Well, welcome to the 2021 season of the NBA. It's like from week to week, even the elite teams, I think every single elite team at some point this year, we've gone to a stretch of a 2 or 3 game stretch where we're saying, you know what? They don't look right. I think they're going to have trouble in the playoffs. And then, 2 weeks later, after they reel off 3 or 4 in a row, this team's got a real chance to win a championship. It's just the way the league is this year, not knowing from night to night who's going to be available to play, not only for your own team, but for your opponent that night. And just the overall mental challenge that the players and coaches are going through with everything that's so unprecedented, once again, much like the bubble, but in many ways very different. So I think the unpredictability from not only, how a team does from month to month, but even sometimes from week to week. So you can't get, I think the key is whether you're a fan, whether you're a player, you can't get too high or low this year because things change very, very quickly.
Mike, speaking of that uncertainty, you follow the league as closely as anyone, and you know that there is this cloud of uncertainty around the Warriors, specifically with Klay Thompson's status heading into next year, and now with James Wiseman and the knee surgery that he had to deal with. From a distance, how close do you think this team is from being back in that conversation as being one of the top teams in the Western Conference?
I do believe Klay Thompson makes an enormous difference where all of a sudden they go from being a team that's trying to get in maybe 7, 8, 9, or 10 to a team that's going to fight for home court advantage in the first round and be as good as anybody. Now, do they need another consistent score? Yes. Do they need some size? Yes. Do they know if James Wiseman's going to be that guy now? No, but there are certainly signs there. So that's a big blow, Nick. Because of the development time, not necessarily just the games to finish this year, but a summer of working on his game, a summer of playing in the summer league. Will he be ready for camp? That's the thing that hurts from that standpoint because you'd really get a good feel for him, and then he'd really get a chance to work on his game. I looked at this up the last time I did a Warriors game, because he was going through some inconsistencies. He played 69 total minutes in college. 69 minutes. That's all he played at that level. And then this year he plays however many games, 30 plus, 35, whatever the finish was. So it's impossible to tell just how good he's going to be, but you've seen signs. So, if he had that chance to go forward and work so much on his game, come back next year, and he still might be fantastic next year, but that would have made a big difference. But to answer your question with a very long-winded answer, and I apologize, I think just having Klay back because of how great he is at both ends, or a Klay that's as good as he was before the injury, puts them right back in there in the mix with the best teams in the West.
Mike, I'm fascinated, as we've all had to deal with the pandemic in our own way, and certainly the perspective, the real life perspective of people getting sick and dying and all of that is hanging over all of it. But from a broadcasting standpoint, how different and challenging and just I know you were in the bubble to the way games are being done now, and we're slowly working toward normal. Is there anything, what's that been like, and how is it maybe slowly over time? Are we starting to get back to normal in your view? I know fans are coming back slowly. We're working our way out of it, but just what has this last year plus been like? I like to kind of just ask people different perspectives.
Yeah, it really is a challenge. Just from a broadcasting standpoint, I've done a number of games from my basement. And to do a game from your basement on a monitor and think that you can possibly, cover everything and see everything, that's a fantasy. It's impossible to do it that way and see everything that you need to see. But you make the best of it, like everybody's doing. You make the best of it. Not complaining. I'm thrilled that we're still calling games, whether it's from my basement or if I'm at the arena. But just to give you an idea, for example, the players get tested every single day, even on the off days. And when I was in the bubble, we got tested almost every day. And to go get tested every day, it doesn't seem like much, and it's not. You go, they swab your nose, et cetera. But just the anxiety of every day waiting to find out what the results are, it takes its toll. And for these players who, have to play on this, this grand stage, every day going through that stress of getting tested. Okay, am I going to be positive? Oh, I'm negative. Thank goodness. It takes its toll. And, some obviously are better equipped to handle it than others, but it's an accumulation of all this different things that are happening that can affect play. And for us in the broadcast end, it doesn't necessarily affect the broadcast, the testing part, but it does affect it in terms of not being in the arena, not having the crowd. For me personally, I love having the crowd. I use the crowd as part of my calls all the time because this quote I keep using for the past years, the fans are the oxygen of sports. And without them, it's just, it's just not as good. It clearly is not as good. So we are getting back to some kind of normal. I think we're going to see more fans come playoff time. Jaylen Brown said the other night one of the reasons he played so well in L.A. is because the Staples Center, the energy of the crowd, even though it was about 2,000, made a difference. It makes a difference for the players. It makes a difference for the broadcasters. And I know it makes a difference for the fans.
Mike, on a happier, broader note, within your own career, you have called so many great games, big plays, unbelievable players. But what is it like specifically for you to call a Steph game, especially when he's playing at this high of a level?
Well, it's the anticipation because, Nick, I'm still a fan at heart. I've been in love with the game of basketball since I was a little kid. So the anticipation of something special might happen. That's the beauty of when a player like Steph Curry or LeBron James or Giannis Antetokounmpo or now like a Luka Doncic, you might step on, into your position at the broadcast booth and call an historic performance because they're all capable of doing that on any given night. And with him, because it's not just the numbers he puts up, but it's the charisma he plays with, it's the flair he plays with, the joy he plays with. He's as fun as anybody for me to broadcast because of all those things I just said. And the fact that even with all the individual things that he does and the individual numbers he puts up, his number one goal is and has always been to get a win for his team. And he's just as happy when his team makes the big play as when he makes the big play. And that whole package of him makes it, you can't wait to get to the arena every time you're doing a Warriors game and he's going to play.
Mike, great stuff. We really appreciate it. A quickie final, just inside baseball kind of a question for you, because this is the Warriors' last ABC game scheduled of the year. Is there an open ABC slot for the final day of the season on May the 16th? Is that a to-be-determined slot? Do you know?
You know what? I'm not sure, John. It could be. I know the last couple of games, they haven't announced the matchups, and I think a lot has to do with because there's going to be the last week of the regular season is going to be really fun because there are going to be a number of games that determine who's in the play-in tournament, who's not, who's out of the playoffs, who gets to the sixth spot and doesn't have to go in the play-in tournament. So I think they've held off on some of the matchups in the final week just to be able to pick from what might be a number of games that have a lot at stake. Yeah, and
since this is the last ABC game, Mike, we'll end it there. But we hope we get to see you in a series calling maybe a first-round matchup with the Warriors and somebody, because that would be a lot of fun with fans back in Chase, which will be able to happen here in the next week. So we're looking forward to that. Thanks a lot, Mike, for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks,
okay,
Mike.
John. Okay, Nick. Thanks for having me on.
All right, good stuff there from the great Mike Breen joining us here, Warriors This Week on 95.7 The Game. Yeah, that final day, man, I keep thinking, because all of the games that day, it's like baseball. They're all TBD as far as the times, and I know the Warriors are playing Memphis, which could have some playoff implications. So I was thinking, maybe that would be one where we might get to see Mike, out at Chase Center for the first time in a while.
And, JD, there's no bigger compliment because when you know that Mike is calling the game and that Mike is on the scene, there is no bigger game. That is the game. When Mike Breen is there, that is the game. And as a quick aside, as he was talking, and I've gotten to know him a little bit through the years, the cool part to me, and Mike said it, he's still a fan, and he's watching Steph like we all are, kind of going, oh, my gosh, can't believe this guy's hitting all these shots. I went to school to be a broadcaster, and so I had listened to Mike growing up, and then he took on more of these national roles on top of his duties with the Knicks and MSG. But I'm sitting there those last couple days in the bubble. I had gone home. I grew up in Orlando, and I got to see those last couple finals games, the Heat-Lakers, and I had gone out to the hotel where the media were staying in that tier 2, and I'm sitting there with our friend Timmy Bontemps, and we're sitting there just talking basketball with Mike Breen. I'm eating my cheeseburger next to Mike, just going through what's happening in the series and what's happening across the league. So it's those kind of moments and those kind of relationships that you have and you build through time, which remain the coolest part to me about this job, because you meet so many different people and the bond is the game. The bond is basketball. But listen to Mike just talk about the Warriors and how much fun he still has calling Steph's games. It reminded me of just how many cool moments that I've had through the years getting to talk to him and getting to have those kind of experiences.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And he is, he's the best in the business right now for good reason, and just the knowledge of the game, the passion for the game. It comes out in every broadcast, and this matchup specifically over the last couple of years has brought out some terrific games, and some terrific games in Boston. Going back a couple of years, Kyrie and Stephen Curry just going back and forth, basically in a duel of one-on-one. In that matchup a couple of years back, I think in 2018, when the Warriors were on top of the basketball world. So it should be a fun one tonight. And the Warriors are playing better. They've won 4 in a row, and obviously the Celtics of late have been playing better basketball after really struggling. So this should be a fun matchup for the Warriors as they go at it against the Boston Celtics tonight. And you can hear it, of course, right here on 95.7 The Game, as our coverage will begin with Warriors Live at 4 o'clock. That'll be me and Ryan Covey, and then Tim and Jim Barnett will be on the call tonight here on 95.7 The Game at 5:30 as the Warriors continue this road trip, looking for their 5th win in a row. Forget 3, 4, 2. Remember when this team couldn't put together more than a 2-game winning streak or a losing streak? They've pushed this thing all the way up to 4, Nick.
And the reason I'd have a little more hope if I were a Warriors fan tonight, JD, is because historically in the league, even if a team is playing pretty well as the Celtics have been, it is very difficult in that first game back off a longer trip, especially going east to west, west to east. And as we know, the Celtics were playing at Staples the other night, playing the Lakers. The Warriors got a night in Boston after their own back-to-back. So in that regard, I think this sets up pretty well for where the Warriors are at, because Steph is playing at such an incredibly high level, and because of that, the confidence that the rest of the group feels is high. It's impressive. They know that he's going to hit the shots when they need him. And how many times this season when Steph gets rolling do you look over and Draymond looks like he's playing at a completely different level, a more engaged level? And when you have those two playing their style together, it sets the tone for everybody else to follow.
And just to put it in perspective, because I actually have been watching a lot of Celtics games. They're one of the teams I actually like watching. When they're playing out here as one of the early games on the West Coast. If they have a 4:30 start, 5 o'clock start, something like that, they're a team that I'll pop on a lot. And I just remember a lot of these teams. And look, they've won 5 in a row now, but a lot of these teams that were coming into Boston and that the Celtics were playing over the course of the last month or so, a lot of these teams that the Warriors are in the race with. Dallas went into Boston and won in the last month. New Orleans went into Boston and won within the last month. Sacramento, who hasn't won a game in April, went into Boston at the end of March and won. Cleveland beat Boston within the last month or so. The Celtics were really struggling, but again, a lot of it is when you play teams, and the Warriors didn't get to play the Celtics at that point where they were in a funk and dealing with some issues as far as their roster, and now you look at it, and they've won 5 consecutive games. Now the Warriors have won 4 in a row. It shapes up for the viewer and for the listener pretty well tonight. But the Warriors are getting a tougher challenge than some of those other teams did when they went into Boston that are in this group that's been fighting with the Warriors for the play-in spots.
It feels like the Celtics have finally found the rhythm that they've been searching for all year, JD. And this is a team that a lot of people had a lot of high hopes for going into the season. They had their own little bubble run. They got knocked off by Jimmy Butler and the Heat in the Eastern Conference Finals. But the thought was you get everybody back in place and you just keep rolling. And you build off the momentum that you had in the bubble down there at Disney. And for a variety of different reasons, that hasn't been what we've seen from the Celtics throughout much of the year. But if ever there was a time to get hot, it's right now. And with Jaylen Brown playing the way that he is, and we heard Mike talk about it a few minutes ago, this team has the two-headed monster in scoring that you're usually going to need to win in the postseason with Tatum and Brown. If those guys can keep moving the way they have been and find that rhythm that has been so elusive for the group, and they play better defense, then all of a sudden, forget what the Celtics have done through the first 4 months of the season. You're looking at a team that has the type of playoff experience that you would want to see from a group that really feels like it can get into the playoffs and push once they get in.
And the Warriors and Celtics played a good one back in early February the 2nd, inside Chase Center. I know that was a game the Warriors felt they let slip through their fingers after getting off to a really good start in that one, led by 11. And that was one where the Warriors were playing in that group of games where they were playing without James Wiseman, and were able to be pretty competitive on that night against that Celtics team. 888-957-9570. We'll go ahead and reopen up the phone lines. It was a pleasure to have Mike Breen on, get a little bit of the conversation rolling about Stephen Curry and this matchup tonight and covering the league. Great chat with Mike. We really appreciate him joining us. We'll get into coming back here in the final segment, just more on what does the 4-game winning streak really mean for the Warriors. They've been doing it without Oubre and Wiseman. We can continue that conversation as well. But 888-957-9570. Some time for phone calls here in the final segment of Warriors This Week on 95.7 The Game.
Now back to 95.7 The Game.
Final segment John Dickinson, Nick Friedel, and you at 888-957-9570. This show's just flown by today, by the way. 11:30? My goodness. Like, it just – I know that a lot of them typically do, Nick, but, I mean, whether it was replaying that Steve Kerr interview, maybe that gave us a jolt, but having Mike Breen on, it feels like we've barely been on the air today. I mean, it just kind of struck me during that break, Nick.
That's the mark of a show that is rolling every Saturday morning, baby. Every Saturday morning, I look forward to our conversation, and I know how many people are calling in, and they're interested in this team. And to me, it's just another reminder of just how much excitement there was surrounding this season and how much intrigue there is about the future and all the questions that surround the organization.
Yeah, how much of what the Warriors are doing now, and they've won 4 in a row, and they'll try and make it 5 tonight in Boston. Kelly Oubre's been out. Obviously, we know the story about James Wiseman. So the Warriors have been able to do it without those two guys. I think Wiseman we can set aside because he's sort of in his own category of, hey, this really – I think anybody that's watched and covered this team all year, it's not a surprise that they're playing a little bit better playing small ball. But, again, look, you're trying to have the best of all worlds where you develop Wiseman because he's a big part of the future. And so at times you're just going to have to live with some of the struggles. So this is clearly a bummer for him in the grander scheme as far as the meniscus injury. It changes the complexion of his offseason. But as far as Oubre goes, is this just still too opponent specific? And hey, the Warriors have run into a string of playing some bad teams. They did beat Denver in there with Houston and OKC and Cleveland as well. But what do you make of the Warriors doing this without Oubre in these last handful of games?
There's a reason why every Saturday from 9 to noon since the season started, JD, I've had a similar message, and that was trade Oubre. I'm not sure if he fits the system anyway. Obviously, the Warriors are better with him because he does provide a little bit of an offensive punch when he does have his rhythm, and he is a pretty solid defender. My point all along was twofold, though. I'm not sure if his game best suits this system that the Warriors like to play, and I'm not sure that they would want to go out on that financial limb to bring him back in a role that very clearly, having asked him the questions myself, I don't think he really wants to be in coming off the bench. So all those factors led to, hey, I don't know if this is the fit. Now, I don't think it's fair to pin it all on, well, Oubre's not on the floor, so this is why they've been better. But I do think it's a broader conversation of Oubre's game just doesn't seem to fit as well as maybe they had hoped, and it absolutely helps that everybody knows their role right now. They are playing small ball, and they're just loving getting up and down the floor and finding Steph Curry outside when they can.
Yeah, and I think it just – they have needed Kelly Oubre, and a lot of their big wins this season, especially against better opponents, have come in games where Kelly Oubre has played very well. And in some ways, he's been the barometer for a good point of this season as to, hey, the Warriors played well tonight. Kelly Oubre played well tonight, or they got a big win. Kelly Oubre. But as far as the big picture goes, it's just felt now for almost the last month, going back to the trade deadline, like the peak opportunity to have him be a part of the future. It felt like it just took a turn, ironically enough, on the day where the Warriors decided that they were going to keep him for the remainder of the year. I mean, that trade deadline day with the Warriors in Sacramento and the comments that came from, after that ball game, after one of the uglier losses, albeit without Stephen Curry, that this team has had this season, and it was at the beginning of a number of ugly losses that would follow. It feels like that was the turning point. And again, ironically, on the night where the Warriors decided, at least for the remainder of this year, to keep him. It feels like he's less a part of those future plans now than he was a month ago, than he was at any point really this season.
And as you would say, JD, let's put the rat on the table, because the rat on the table here is that the second Oubre said, I remember the whole exchange, I said, would you be comfortable coming off the bench next season if that's the role with Klay coming back? And he's like, well, I don't want to talk about the future, brother, but I've got a lot more to offer than just coming off the bench. From that moment in time, that's when everything shifted. Because up to that point, JD, and this is part of how it got to this level, because we didn't really hear much from Kelly to begin with. He struggled to start the year. He didn't want to go into those press conferences as much as some of his other teammates, because he didn't want to go through the struggles. I mean, he's a human being. I understand that. But the second he answered that question, the way in which he did, and said, hey, I got a lot more to offer than coming off the bench, everybody inside and outside the organization went, okay, well, doesn't sound like this may be a fit. And then you've got Andrew Bogut coming out on his podcast saying that the people made it known to Oubre, hey, we had Andre Iguodala here, and he came off the bench, and he's a Finals MVP. So you can really trace it back right there to me, because up to that point, there was still that uncertainty, the almost secrecy of, well, would Oubre fit next year in the role that he'd likely be asked to play? And as soon as he answered that question, all that uncertainty was gone. You knew where he stood. You knew where he wanted to be. And look, that's his prerogative. He can make whatever decision he wants. But if we're trying to trace back where it started to feel like Kelly Oubre wasn't coming back and may not be the fit, and everybody was kind of ready to move on without him, it was right then and there, because he's had a couple good games since that point, JD, but he certainly hasn't had consistently really good games where you went, oh, okay, well, we can't lose this guy. I mean, just look at the record. They're playing really well without him. It's not that he couldn't still help them. It's just that the entire narrative around his season and his future shifted right there in that moment.
And I still think he could and likely will help them, especially if they want to advance beyond the play-in tournament and give a team hell in the Western Conference. And you look at it, I mean, if you wind up being in, it's really shaping up where if you wind up getting in to the 7 or the 8 seed, and again, just quickly to run through it so people understand it, and we probably should do this more over the course of the next month, the top 7 through 10 make the play-in. 7 plays 8, 9 plays 10. And so the 7-8 winner is the 7 at that point. And the 7-8 loser then goes on to play the 9-10 winner, and that becomes basically an elimination game, to where if the 9-10 winner can win 2 games consecutively, they would take the 8 seed. It gives the team in that 7-8 slot an opportunity to lose a game and then come back and win the second game and still get the 8 seed. So if you wind up 7 or 8, because you're one of the 2 teams that advances in the play-in tournament, you're playing the Jazz or the Suns. And look, the Jazz have been great this season. The Suns have been terrific. Both these teams now with 40 wins, 42-14 for the Jazz, 40-15 looking at it for the Suns right now. And they're basically locked in at this point to the top 2 slots. So you're getting one of those teams if you could advance in the play-in tournament. And I think if you're the Warriors, you probably like your chances of giving one of those 2 teams hell at a higher level than if you had to play a Lakers or a Clippers in a first-round series. But to me, Oubre at that point would need to be a part of it if you're really going to make a run and try and make a team sweat it out in that first round.
100%. And the point about the Suns and the Jazz, JD, is well taken, because the Suns and the Jazz, while they've had nice regular seasons, they haven't proven a damn thing in the postseason. So you can't tell me that Steph and Draymond, assuming they're healthy and rolling like they have been lately, especially Steph, aren't looking at those standings going, well, I don't know if Draymond's looking at the standings, but
no,
Steph,
he's not.
Steph is looking at the standings.
He'll look at the matchup after they win the play-in tournament and get into the. He'll be like, okay, what? We're in a real series now. Okay, now I'll talk about it.
Now we can get into it a little bit, but Steve Kerr definitely is, and Steph certainly is. He's very well aware of where they stand and what's going on. if that is the matchup, if they can get through the play-in and they can get into Utah or Phoenix, there is no fear whatsoever. There is a hope that, hey, let's get hot and let's see how far we can take this thing. I don't know if I would pick the Warriors to beat either one of those two teams, but I certainly would put money on the Warriors making that series hell for whatever that 1 or 2 seed may be. So that part of this really is fascinating because the Warriors have played at such a high level for so long with guys in Steph and Draymond, and I'd add Kevon Looney in there who have played in the biggest of games. They're going to look at a Phoenix or Utah team and go, all right, we may not win, but they ain't scaring us before this thing starts.
Yeah, and it's just, the way that the West has shaken out, it does. And look, this conversation had been tabled because the Warriors a week ago were 4 games under 500. We're not going to have that conversation if the Warriors are 4 games under 500 and looking like, they're basically one more loss away from falling behind the Pelicans and being on the outside looking in and having to fight back. But you win 4 in a row, you get to 500. And the one thing that I've been steadfast in saying, Warriors would feel fine about winning an elimination game against the Spurs. Warriors-Grizzlies, they probably should have beat them twice without Steph going back about a month ago. Warriors-Mavs, we've seen those two teams play, although the Mavs have played better basketball. They're struggling a little bit now, but they went on a white-hot run over, basically from the night that they beat the Warriors the night before the Super Bowl. But the Warriors wouldn't fear the Mavs. So it's kind of crazy how quickly this thing can shift. A lot of it is Steph, but a lot of it also is the Warriors have finally – less is more, it feels like, for the Warriors, right? Like the smaller the rotation can be and the smaller that they have to play as far as who is actually in the lineup, it seems to benefit this team.
And I throw one more name out there again. If we're being fully transparent, in the long term, is it helpful that James Wiseman is out? Of course not.
No chance.
Of course not. They need him to develop, and they need him to be a really good player moving forward. But, Mr. Dickinson, in the short term, is it a good thing for this team to stack wins while not trying to force-feed the ball to James Wiseman and give him 20 or 25 minutes a game? Yeah.
Yeah.
They're better without James Wiseman. They're better with a team that knows exactly what their roles are and knows exactly how to play the roles in which they're being asked to do so. So that part of this cannot get lost. Nobody wanted to see James get hurt. Everybody understands that they have to be very good, and he has to be very good together if they ultimately want to get to where they want to go. But in the very short term of this season, they are absolutely better off not having to wedge Wiseman in there and trying to teach him things on the fly.
Posey in P-Town on the text line chimes in, and I know the answer for you to this because we've talked about it, but he just puts it bluntly and asks the question, should the Warriors have traded Oubre at the deadline? Should they have at any cost traded Oubre at the deadline in your mind? I've got a take on it, but I want you to just either confirm my suspicion or just how do you feel about it?
I wish we had the Daniel Bryan. Yes, 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 yes.
Well, you said it from December 26th, I think, which was the first day that we did this show.
That first week, I went, I don't know if this is it.
2 games, Nick. It was Brooklyn and Milwaukee, and we hadn't even done a show yet. Hey, Warriors this week, 2020-2021 season. It's JD and Friedel. We'll be with you until May. Nick, great to be with you. Trade Kelly Oubre right now. Yes! I think it was the first thing you said to me on this show.
Yes! There you go. Yes! There it is. Yes! There it is. Yes. 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 JD, truly, Kelly Oubre has had some nice moments for this team, and if Oubre was all in on being a reserve and that super sub next season playing 25 minutes or so, okay, great. But he's not. And this team plays a certain style in which Oubre still doesn't look that comfortable in, especially knowing, JD, who plays the best off Steph Curry in general? Guys who can shoot from the outside. Now, Oubre got more on track after a brutal start to the season. But those first 2 months, you can't just delete them. I mean, he was really bad. He really struggled to shoot it from the outside. So whatever he was giving you defensively, he wasn't giving you much offensively early and often there. So I absolutely, if it had been me, I would have traded him long before the deadline. But he worked himself into a little more value, and I think they're going to look back, even if they get a trade exception, whatever. I would have just taken whatever you could have gotten on that day and been done.
And I'll take you behind the curtain a little bit. Pazzi actually made I changed the context a little bit. Pazzi actually says, "Hey, the Warriors should have traded him." For the theater of the mind, I wanted to point it as a question, and he was coming down our road a little bit, like, "Come on, guys, you know they should have traded him." For me, it's less of an issue because I do think he helps this team for the remainder of this year. And I've said this all along. Like, for me, Oubre doesn't have to be a part of the future plan to help win games this year. And I think there are still games that he can help this Warriors team win this year down the stretch that can allow them to have a record that gives them a shot in that play-in tournament. To me, if you didn't have a deal that made sense, and I know there's been different reports as far as, what was on the table, what wasn't. But if you didn't have a deal that made sense to where you were going to acquire somebody that you could keep moving forward, that you felt could be in a rotation piece, I'm fine not making the deal. That being said, though, the onus, Nick, has to be on making sure now that you trade him and try and do some kind of a sign and trade where you don't get hard capped, but you do turn it into a traded player exception to where you can still use that slot to add to the roster. That is important to me.
You turn it into an asset. That's what you have to do. But, JD, to the point about Oubre can help them win games, I'm with you. I understand what you're saying, especially against the better teams. But the flip side of that argument is they're winning games without Oubre. I mean, OKC, Cleveland. I mean, Denver was a nice win, but I mean, Houston and OKC are literally trying not to win. Tanks are out, baby, in full force.
They are trying not to win, and Cleveland's a little bit better than that. The Denver game. Denver's been a team all year, and man, what a brutal blow for Jamal Murray. By the way, I mean that. For him and for that organization, which is one that, believed they were going to be primed to make a jump, it just, that kind of injury just sucks because it basically wrecks 2 seasons now. Like, this year is wrecked for them. And look, they'll go out and be in the playoffs and maybe they win a series, maybe they don't. It'd be harder to win one now without him. But now next year, next year's a wash too. I mean, he'll probably come back at some point late in that year, but he's not going to be himself in March or April heading toward the playoffs. So it's for all intents and purposes, you hope for the best and you send Jamal Murray well wishes, but he's basically done until October of 2022 as far as having a legitimate impact again on, helping that team grow and try to contend. And
sadly, JD, I've now lived this twice with 2 different teams I've covered. I lived it with Derrick Rose and the Bulls about 10 years ago, tearing that ACL, and you're absolutely right. Not only is that year gone, because the Bulls, just like the Warriors with Klay Thompson a couple years ago, they believed they were championship contenders. They believed there was a legitimate chance, and certainly in the Warriors' case, recent history told us there was more than a chance they were going to win another title. When you lose a max player, when you lose a star of that caliber on your team, and you've been building up to that point for several years, it wrecks 2 years. that is spot on, because your dreams of winning a championship are gone instantly. And then when you start looking at the calendar and you start looking at how arduous of a rehab path it is to come back from that injury, that whole next year is gone. So it is just the worst possible thing that can happen for a player and for an organization. Because if you believed that you could win a championship before the injury, then when you're looking in the mirror and you're being honest with yourself, you know that those dreams are instantly gone. So it's a fact of life in the NBA. It's a fact of life in pro sports. But the Nuggets are the latest team to have to deal with the cold reality that one injury to a star player changes everything. And not just changes everything in the short term, it changes everything in the long term as well.
Yeah, it definitely does, and it's just brutal. And because the Nuggets were a team that was, trying to do everything the right way, and they've really overhauled their roster in a lot of ways around Murray and around Jokic, and now with Michael Porter Jr. As well, and the way they were able to bring him along to the point where he's a factor, and maybe could help push them as his game grows to another level, or become an asset that could maybe bring a third star into the mix to get them over the top. They felt like they had a lot of options, and now, it's the kind of thing that we might look back a year and a half or probably 2 years from now, when you look at the calendar in the spring of 23, let's say, after Murray's able to come back and really play a full year for the first time, we might be talking about the Nuggets 2 years from now like, yep, they never did it, and it's time to break them up, and it just never happened. And you would be able to trace it all the way back to that night in San Francisco earlier this week. It really is just a bummer to witness it, for any team, any player. But it's tough when you see a franchise that's really trying to go about doing things the right way, and they still get wrecked by it.
Well, and you'd add this part as well, because this is crucial in looking back in the history of these injuries. And this is the sad but true fact. JD, I just mentioned Derrick Rose and Klay Thompson. Derrick Rose came back, played a few games not even the next year, because he sat out that whole next season. The next year. Played a few games, and he hurt his other knee. And you hear this time and again, when somebody suffers that kind of ACL injury, their chances of suffering another injury go up in a major way, because their body has to readjust. And what did we see with Klay? Sadly, it's awful, but it's just reality. Klay tears his ACL, and then he's rehabbing to get back from the ACL injury, and then he tears his Achilles. And so you wish that on no one, and you hope that Jamal Murray goes after this rehab and he comes back just the same, if not better, than he was before, because what we saw, especially in the bubble, showed you that Murray is one of the really talented young players in the league. But when you're watching recent history in the NBA with these injuries, it's not even so much that the first injury screws up a year or two. It's the possibility of a second injury that can screw up a lot more time than that.
Yeah, that's a great point. So we send our well wishes, obviously, to Jamal Murray. A tough situation there, and a tough injury. And look, we've seen it. I know Warriors fans have seen it, obviously, over these last couple of years. Final 90 seconds or so here, Nick. Just thoughts on the week and what the next week will tell us. I think the next week is going to tell us more than the last week did. Boston, Philly, a Washington team that the Warriors should know now obviously can beat them if they aren't on their game. And then the first game at Chase Center with fans, a rematch against Denver after the Warriors just beat Denver. So, it feels like the Warriors have gotten to a point where they can exhale a little bit at 28-28, and they're earning some separation. But if we come back and we're on the air next week and this team is gone in the opposite direction, I think that will tell a more accurate story of what this team is.
And I'm surprised that I'm actually going to say this, JD, but I don't think they're going to go in the wrong direction now. I think the run that Steve Kerr has talked about for 6 weeks is coming. And my only fear now for the Warriors is that they are going to win so many games here down the stretch that they're going to mess up that pick, that Oklahoma City pick, because they're playing in a style they're comfortable with and that everybody knows, and Steph is playing at this level. When that happens, all the pieces are going to come together.
Wow. See, I think they're going to be able to thread that needle, and they won't have to do anything to try and impact it one way or another. I think they're going to have a ho-hum week. I think this Boston game's tough. I think the Philly game's going to be tough. I think they probably get Washington, Denver on the rematch, even without Murray. Like, we'll see. That's coming off a long trip for the Warriors. First game with fans. Like, I think the Warriors are going to go on a run. I actually, though, see a little bit of a setback here in the next week before they go on the run, and that will ultimately allow them to be clear of messing up, getting into the top 10 where they wind up having to give up that pick. Nick, great stuff as always, man. Really appreciate it. We'll talk again next Saturday.
Always, buddy.
All right, Scrub Saturday is coming up next. Keep it locked. Whitey and Coes have got you covered for the next 4 hours, and then I'll be back with Ryan Covey, Warriors Live at 4 o'clock. The Dubs and the Celtics. Keep it locked right here at your home for Warriors basketball, 95.7 The Game.